Alright, so I am sitting here in the doorway of this conference center beneath the hotel that we've been shooting for the past few days in Hawaii. And while the conference center may be one of the more unsexy, less glamorous parts of a hotel, it's something that you're going to have to shoot at every single hotel you come across. Now, this could be a really easy or difficult photograph depending on your outlook. In most of these conference centers, the lighting is extremely even and uniform. That means they're easy to light, it's ready to go, but it also means that it's kind of boring. The next thing is that we're going to have to make these things look good, and usually when you show up, they're empty or they're not ready to go. So what that entails is getting out 200 chairs or 50 tables or whatever and creating a little bit of a scene to make it look like there's some life in here, to make these appealing to the people who might rent them. That is, larger companies, corporate entities, people who are going to have retreats here, motivational speaking, stuff like that. When we first showed up here, this was about half put together. All the tables were out, but the stage was completely empty, and it felt like there was nothing really going on. It was kind of bizarre. So what we did was I set up a stage, and I put on top of that kind of a panel setup for if there were 6 or 8 speakers addressing a larger crowd. It immediately breathed some more life into this otherwise dull scenario. To add a little more life in here, we scoured the hotel and found one giant plant that we could actually move, but I don't want to just have one plant in here, so I'm going to double that. I'm going to teach you a quick trick in Photoshop that'll show you how to take one object and duplicate it. If you'll notice, the camera is behind me on a table, and I've chosen a very strong one-point perspective from a good amount of height right down the center of the room. The reason I chose that was I wanted to get a little bit of height so that we see some depth in those rows of tables, and I wanted to show the expansiveness of this room, which again would appeal to someone who's bringing a large conference here. The downfall of that, however, is that everything has got to be absolutely perfectly lined up, especially when you're shooting a scene with such strong repetition in line. So even though when you first arrived here and everything looked pretty well put together, from the camera's perspective, everything was a bit wonky and not straight, so we lined up the chairs in perfect diagonals so that it read very well to the camera, not just to the stage. This may seem like an easy process, but this actually took like 30-45 minutes. Now, we had to clean up all the chairs and get them exactly lined up in diagonal, otherwise the entire effect of that strong one-point perspective would be lost. This turned out to be a much larger pain than any of us had anticipated. When you're doing this, of course, you're going to want an assistant, and oftentimes you're going to have a lot of help from the hotel as well. So if you're going to do this, get all hands on deck, assign everyone a task, and try to make these shots perfect. Because again, with that one-point perspective, you really got to make sure that you've got everything locked in. So now that we have our composition set and the scene staged, I'm going to show you what it looks like with no lighting whatsoever. This is a straight out of camera shot. Now, as you can see in this shot, the lighting is nice and even, nice and consistent, and it's not bad. But it's me, and I like to make my shots have a little bit of edge, so I know I'm going to kick it up a notch. What I'm going to do to add a little bit of zing to this shot is take my Pro Photo, my B1, add a reflector dish, and I'm going to add some light highlights, a little bit of texture and depth to these chairs to give them a little bit more edge. My first attempt at this had me with a very blue flash compared to the interior lighting. This lighting is actually a bit of a tungsten color, so I added a full cut of CTO gel on my flash to balance it out and make it look not so cool compared to the warm interior. Since the lighting in here is so flat and even, I can take a little bit of creative liberty from where I light each of these rows of chairs. I'm going to come at this from the side, which is going to bring out a little shape and edge to each row. Now the last thing I've got to do is duplicate that plant. I hate that it's kind of lopsided and we just have one. Now the easiest thing to do would just be to lasso it in Photoshop, Control-C, Control-V, paste that thing in there. But it's going to look a little bit goofy. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to have my assistants physically move it, and then I'm going to light it again on the opposite side. I'm also going to have them rotate it, so it's going to look a bit different. It's going to be at a different angle. It's going to look much more natural than if I just copied and pasted it. The absolute last thing I'm going to do is bracket my scene to get that complete, wide dynamic range, everything from the brightest brights to the darkest darks. This room wasn't really set up for some crazy event. It was pretty simple to photograph. I would say the hardest part is absolutely getting it perfectly set and staged. That's where you're going to want to take a lot of time. We probably spent an hour just staging the chairs and maybe 5 or 10 minutes photographing it. So while this conference room was extremely simple to shoot and very evenly lit, I don't want you to think that all of them are like this. If you were shooting a conference room that's set up for a wedding or something, take a little creative liberty, maybe use some of those can lights, some funky stage lighting to create interesting colors. There's a lot you can do with these. But again, you need to shoot these regular corporate-styled conference rooms because these are a big sell for the hotels. Now that we've got all of our pieces, we're going to go into Photoshop and put this together. All right, so we just had a super fun time arranging hundreds and hundreds of chairs with a piece of cable, as you saw in the previous video. And this is actually one of those shots that at first glance, seems really simple, but as you just saw on location, it took a ton of work to get this looking its absolute best. So I think these are, some sick part of me thinks these are really fun. I love doing all the staging and getting everything perfect. But I'm kind of excited to dive into this because on the surface, it looks pretty simple, but there is a lot going on here to make this happen. So let's go ahead and you guys know how I cull. I've generally already culled all of these pictures for you, but we can just kind of skip through, and I want to show you some of the flash pops and how we're going to white balance these before we jump into Photoshop. So because we had these varied kind of funky overhead LED lighting, the gel wasn't exactly perfect. So in order to get these in line, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample a white balance point from some of the chairs that don't have a flash pop on them. And I will just go for a nice neutral gray right there. And that looks a little bit blue. We can probably come up a little bit more with the warmth there. To something like that where it looks nice and white. And we're going to take all of those that I've culled, going to apply that white balance across this entire set here. And you can see me, as you did on location, jumping around with the flash, lighting everything up. Going to apply that white balance. As usual, I'm going to do my little shadow and highlight adjustment here in Camera Raw. Again, going to sync those adjustments across the entire set also. And let's go ahead and take these and jump right into Photoshop. All right, here we are in Photoshop. We're going to go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, navigate to this Lessons folder, and grab all 13 of those files. Go ahead and click OK. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn off all these layers except for the base. And you might look at this and think, oh yeah, it looks pretty good, you know? But I think you'll agree that after we edit this, it feels very flat once you see all of the kind of texture and interest that we add on these otherwise dull and gloomy chairs in this ballroom. So what we're going to do is something I've been doing for most of this tutorial. If I don't sound like a broken record now, I don't know what to tell you. We're going to turn on number 12 here, and I'm going to Alt-click to add a black layer mask. I'm going to set the blend mode to lighten, take a big soft white brush, and just very gently at 30% opacity, paint in some of that highlight from the flash on those chairs. And that's going to add a little bit of dimension, a little bit of depth to the rows, rather than just having them be flat brown conference center chairs. And I'm going to do that for number 11 as well. Same thing. Set the blend mode to lighten, Alt-click, add a black layer mask, soft brush, and start painting in some of those chairs. Make sure you avoid any extraneous information, such as this tree in the background that we're going to composite in much better later. Number 10, again, we're going to Alt-click, add a black layer mask, blend mode to lighten, you know the drill. And 09, Alt-click, set the blend mode to lighten, and start brushing in some of that light. Now, if you may have noticed a second ago, it looks like one of these chairs moved while we were shooting. And if you go all the way up to the top, what we had here was a very long day. And we had 15 or so people running around trying to get this thing set up. And at some point, one of these chairs got bumped. That's not the end of the world. I'll show you guys how to fix this. So this is the 09 layer here. What I'm going to do is take a black brush, or I'll take a white brush. I'm just going to paint in all of that layer so that chair is totally solid. And while there's no light on it, it's not really a problem yet. I'm going to copy some light from another chair and paste it on. We're going to do that at the end, so it doesn't look like a dead chair in the middle of all that. And go ahead and finish up painting in that highlight, and then we'll go to number 8. Be careful because this one, it gets really ugly right in the foreground, but what I really want is that far left of the frame, so I'm only going to paint in some of that, like way over here. And just go very gently on it. Then we'll go for number 7. Again, same thing. Very gentle in the foreground. We don't want to overpower everything. And again, you see that chair, same thing happened. So somewhere in the middle of this shot, this chair got bumped, but that is not the end of the world, and there's an easy workaround. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to group together layers 7 through 12. Those are sort of our light painting layers. And in order to fix that chair, I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to name this Chair Fix. And what I'm going to do, first of all, let's make sure that chair is totally solid and just paint out any excess light that landed on it. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to grab the pen tool, and I'm just going to go to this chair right behind it. And very quickly here, I'm just going to pen that out. You don't need to be super precise, because what we're going to do is we're going to copy this and then duplicate it in the lightened blend mode. And it should line up pretty well with the other one. So I'm going to go Shift Command C, Command V, and that's going to give me a new layer with the chair on it, so we can call that chair. And you might actually be able to get rid of this one for now, the Chair Fix layer. So let's drag that chair up, and I'm going to hit Command T to free transform it here. And I just want you to size that to the same size as the chair in front of it. So something like that. And then you can change the blend mode on that chair to lighten, and it almost perfectly fits onto the messed up chair. Now add a mask to that layer, and you can see where there's like a little bit of wonkiness around this pot here. You can go ahead and paint it out and seamlessly blend that in to the chair that's missing the light. So super easy fix. And we got lucky because everything was so repetitive in this image. We could just copy another chair and paste it over. So now we have all of our chairs lit up. And if I turn that on and off, you can see how everything came to life a bit. So I'm going to turn those on. I'm going to add a mask to the group itself and take a brush. And I'm just going to clean up some of that light painting a little bit so it only sticks on the chairs. I don't really want any of it up on this wall here. If you turn it on and off really quick, there we go. All right, so that's looking good. Now, I didn't gel the light perfectly. I don't know if you guys can tell, but if you have a good sense of color, you will see that the light is actually a little bit cooler than the room light. Maybe it was between like 1/4 and 1/8 or 1/4 and 1/2 CTO or something, and it was 11:30 at night, and we were all exhausted. So in any case, something went wrong. Not a big problem here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer right above my light painting layers group here. And you can go ahead and collapse that. And instead of just going nuts with the curves here and adjusting all the colors of this room, I'm going to create a clipping mask and clip that layer to the light painting group. So you can hold Alt and you'll get this little clipping mask symbol. Click between the curves layer and the light painting group. And anything you do on this curves layer is only going to affect the group directly below it. So in essence, we are altering the color of only that light. And in my curves group here, I'm going to go to the blue channel. And I know the blue is in the highlights, so I'm just going to pull down on that blue ever so slightly. And there you can see the color matches much better. And you can go pretty far just to exaggerate that. You can see that's obviously a bit too far. It's a subtle change, somewhere like right in there. And now the color of our light matches that of the tables and chairs. And if I turn that on and off, you can see hopefully the difference might be a little bit too much. So right there, very subtle change, but now it doesn't feel so cold and not so wonky. So anyway, that being said, let's keep going here. Let's go, what I ended up doing up on the stage was lighting some of this texture in the black curtain up there and giving a little bit of a shimmer to all the stuff up on that speaking panel table. So again, same technique, Alt-click, black layer mask, set the blend mode to lighten, take your brush, and gently, at a low opacity, paint in some of that light. It almost looks like a focused spotlight on the table up there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this layer. Some of these layers are kind of similar, so you can do what you feel is appropriate to make things look good. Now you may not need layer 4 because we did get light from the left. But let's talk about the tree in here. And as you saw on location, all I did to duplicate that tree from one side to the other was we just left the camera where it was on the tripod, dragged that tree to the other side of the stage, and now on layer 3 here, I can Alt-click. I'm going to leave that blend mode in normal, and I'm just going to paint in that duplicated tree. Super simple. And you can if you go too far with it, or you think it's too bright, you can paint it out a little bit. And we're going to do the same for layer 2 here. If I think we need more light, Alt-click, and I'll add some light to those chairs up there. So you can just finesse these layers as you see fit. And lastly, there's these curtains over here. Just adding a little bit of texture back there, so it's just not this kind of black hole. And something cool about the light and blend mode is, even though there is no tree on this layer, because we're in the light and blend mode, all that Photoshop is letting through is that light from our flash. So it lets you cheat a little bit. And I'm going to group those together, and I'm going to call it front of stage area lighting. And there is a little bit of blue in there, so I'm just going to do the same curves trick to that group. Add a clipping mask, click between, go to my blue channel, and just this blue is a little more in the shadows. Pull that down so it matches. Something like that. And you can tweak it until you have it perfect, but that looks pretty good to me. Something right in there. I'll add a mask to that group and tweak the lighting. I think it's a little hot on that right-hand side. Just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I'm going to add a little drama here. I want to focus the attention on the front of the stage up there at our panel. So I'm going to add a curves layer. And I'm just going to kind of add a little vignette here. Take my brush, paint in some shadow up in the ceiling and in the foreground, because honestly these chairs are kind of ugly. No one needs to see them. We'll darken them a little bit. Same on the edges here. All right, and this is looking really good. And now I think it's time that we go ahead and clone everything out. Now, if I'm looking at this, what's that? Looks like I found a camera here. That is from this big group here. So I'm going to go back to this mask, take a brush, and remove the remnants of that camera from the scene. Because I remember there was one part of this where, yeah, we were doing filming. They were getting shots of me lighting everything, and the camera got in the way. So if I add a mask to that group, I can better control my light and all of those layers, of course, within. So like I was saying, I think this is looking really good, but there's a lot of cloning, a little bit of cleaning up that I want to do. So let's go ahead and I'm going to teach you a new clone trick here. I'm going to go Command-Alt-Shift-E and flatten everything to a new layer. And we're going to use the vanishing point filter Because if I wanted to, for example, clone out these little dark splotches in this carpet, like it looks like, I don't know, someone vomited or spilled juice or something on the floor, whatever it is, I obviously want to get rid of that before I deliver this for a client. And if I'm just using the normal clone tool, and you can see this very sort of intricate pattern down here, and in order to replicate this piece right here, I'd have to jump all the way up. And if I start cloning that, it's not going to match up. Like, look at the difference in size between those diamonds. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the vanishing point clone tool. We're going to go to Filter, Vanishing Point. And now this is honestly a little bit archaic, in my opinion. Photoshop could do a world of good when it comes to making this work a lot easier. But here's how it works. So I have my little four-way pointer here. What I need to do is drag out the actual plane, the three-dimensional plane that floor is on. And you can see these lines down here of the carpet that lead us to the front. So I'm going to drag out lines that match up with that plane. So it's straight across front to back and angles on either side there. And Photoshop should give you these blue lines. That means that you're in business and ready to clone. So once you have your plane all drawn out, you can go ahead and grab your clone stamp tool up here. And what you can do, you can sample this pattern from, say, the left or the right around it. So I'll sample it from the right. And Photoshop will automatically use an algorithm to shift those pixels so that when I sample this and move it over, it's going to perfectly line up in the center. And I can super easily clone out that stain in the middle of the carpet. And I can do the same thing up here. So if I want to get rid of this little drain or this electrical outlet thing, whatever it is, I can sample something from way over here. Again, I'll sample this diamond. Photoshop will then skew those pixels as I move it along that vanishing point tool so that we have a perfect match in the middle of the floor. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this with all of these stains in here. Again, there's one big one down here. So it looks like I'll sample from the center for this one. Photoshop will automatically resize and skew those pixels to match our vanishing lines on the floor, if you will. I could do a better job than that, right? Grab it again. There we go. All right, anything else we need to clone while we're in here? I can get that with the normal clone stamp. There's this dot on the floor. Just for the lesson, we'll do this as well. Grab this tip of that diamond, bring it over, line it up. Photoshop is working to skew and resize that so it matches the pattern on the floor, and boom, we have a perfect clone using the vanishing point tool. Now you can go ahead and click OK. Photoshop will save that to a new layer. We can zoom out, and I'll turn that on and off. And you would never be able to clone that with the regular clone tool unless you wanted to spend way too much time on it. So we'll rename this layer Vanishing Point Clone. And then there's a couple things I want to clean up in here before we're totally done. For example, the little things on the floor here. And there's like this funky line in the fabric up here. So I'm just going to make a selection up here and get rid of this black line right here. All right, that's looking good there. And now what I want to do while I'm on this layer, I'm going to use the, let's see. I'm going to hit you another clone trick while we're in here. I'm going to select my marquee, my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to just drag it over this exit sign. And again, you can see there's this sort of complicated pattern back there. Might be tricky to clone. If I hit Shift F5, it brings up the fill dialog box. And if you set the contents to content aware and match my settings here and then click OK, Photoshop, the content aware tool is honestly amazing. It will match that pattern and perfectly clone these tricky little electrical boxes throughout. We can do the same thing on the right-hand side. There's this ugly thing over here. Shift F5, fill, hit enter. That should be the standard shortcut for that dialog box. That's the Photoshop default. All right, and while I have my myself in a cloning mood here, we'll go back to the clone stamp tool. Well, you know what I'm going to do? Let's take care of this naughty box down here. So this, I can't content aware fill because Photoshop isn't smart enough to deal with these chair backs. If I try it, what I'm going to get is this ugly mess. So I'll deselect that, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy manually some of this pattern from this wall right here, and I'm just going to lift it and paste it on top of that. So let's see, let's get the lasso tool out, and we'll just make a quick copy of that whole little section of wall. Command-Shift-C, Command-V. And again, I'm going to have to size this to sort of match. And I'm going to duplicate it, so Command-V again. And you know what? Let's just copy that layer because we resized it. So drag that layer 1 down to the new layer button. And just sort of drag it on top of that. And then add a layer mask and brush them together so you get rid of that line. Nice and gently. You can move it up a little bit so that it blends seamlessly. And just for good measure, I'll do it one more time. Just copying that over and over and over. All right, and now I'm going to merge these layers together. So I just have one big piece of wall. And I'm going to add a mask. And just taking a brush, I'm just going to paint out where I don't need that mask to be. Something like that. What's behind you? All right, now obviously the colors don't match or anything, so we're going to have to take care of that. Go ahead and unlink those layers, and let's make this a little bigger to cover that whole piece of wall. And I'll keep working on my mask here, make it perfect. There we go. Okay, so let's make these match. I got that like a brownish reddish here on a nice yellow wall behind, so I'm going to add a curves layer. I'm going to clip it to this. I'm going to rename this wall fix. And back on my curves layer, obviously it's a little too dark. And one easy way to match brightness, if you're struggling with your curves and matching your compositing, what you can do is add a black and white adjustment layer. And when you're working in black and white, all that you're paying attention to are the luminosity values. So you can adjust your curves. Like obviously that's too bright, that's too dark, but you remove the color information. It makes it way easier to match when you're compositing. That looks a bit better right there. It's going to be like somewhere in there. And that's the right brightness, but obviously not the right color. And I know it's the right brightness because, again, I've removed the color info with that black and white adjustment layer. We can go ahead and delete that. We're done with that layer. And now it's time to match the color. There's no super easy trick here. You just got to kind of eyeball it. But obviously that's a lot redder than the wall around it. So I'm going to drag down the curves on that layer. On the red channel there, that looks a bit better. Looks like it has maybe a little bit of green in there. I'm not sure. Let's see what happens. Nope, that's exactly the opposite of what I wanted. There we go. Add a little bit in. And if I zoom out, It looks pretty decent. We could clean this up a little bit. So I'm gonna hide that and see how we've done. All right, looks good for now. I'm gonna make a new layer. I'm gonna rename that edge, like you two. And I'm just going to pen tool this area over here and get rid of this shadow. And deselect. All right, now this is looking better and better. I'll just do a little cloning here to clean up my faking of it, if you will. Let's see. How does that look way out wide? That's 100% right there. It still looks a little funky. Let's see how we can clean that up. This edge is a little too dark, so I'll borrow some of this side here and clone it all the way down to get rid of that. And I just want to get rid of some of these lines. That's a tough one. Let's go ahead and add another curves layer. We're going to stack these, so you can stack multiple clipping masks. And with this one, like, you can see how those are a little bit darker. You might be thinking I'm crazy and completely anal retentive, but I want to make this perfect. So I'm going to invert this mask and brush some of that brightness back in. Just a little bit. All right, and that looks pretty good to me. There's that one stubborn little piece right there. Let's kill you. Huh, I wonder where that came from. There we go. Now it's gone. Now it is looking good. All right. So that was kind of a pain, but we'll make a group out of it and we'll call it Stubborn Wall Unit. Now it's gone. And the last thing I'm going to do, make this perfect, a really quick frequency separation pass here. On layer 1, I'm going to rename that color. Layer 2, we're going to name that texture, and I know we've done this 10 times so far, but I'll walk you through it again. On this color layer, we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll go to like 15 pixels or something, hit Enter. And on the texture layer, I'm going to go to Image, Apply Image, and I want you to match this dialog box if you're working alongside me. And you want to apply this image to the color layer, click OK, zoom out, and you're going to get this high pass filter looking thing. Set your blend mode to linear light, and we're back in business. And what I'm going to do, like over here, these fingerprints or something, I don't trust Photoshop to content aware of that, so we're going to have to frequency separate it. So in order to get this perfect, I'm going to grab the texture from up here. Make sure your sample is set to current layer only. Grab the texture, and we're going to line it up and pull it down. And I might have gone a little bit too far. But we'll see. Yeah, I went a little too big with it. Back up just a bit. Make my brush a little smaller. Grab that texture. And paint away those fingerprints. And there we have a perfect clone of those messy fingerprints on the wall. And let's see, anything over on the right-hand side? No. But I do want to take out some of these wrinkles in the fabric. So again, you can do this to your heart's content, but I'm just going to do it quickly here so you guys get the idea of how powerful this tool is. All right, now if you want to go nuts with this, you can. We'll group those together, but again, you can see how easy it is to clone out those stubborn wrinkles all over this fabric. And if I were going to spend a couple hours on this for a client, I would do this. But like I said, I don't want to make you guys fall asleep. So for now, we will call that a day. I'm going to go ahead and rename that to frequency separation. And I'm going to close that group. And I'm going to Command-Alt-Shift-E to flatten everything to a new layer. I'm going to drag out some rulers, make sure everything both vertically and horizontally is nice and straight. And we're going to skew this until it's perfect. And we're a little bit off center. I'm going to just drag that slightly to the right. Looks like this side's got to come down a smidge, maybe over a little bit. Same with you. Even looks like the ceiling might be sagging a little bit. So I'm going to go to the warp tool, and I'm just gonna pull the ceiling up just a smidge. That should do it. All right, go ahead and hide that. Now you can see we're much straighter. And I think that's our final shot. I'm gonna go ahead and save that. And I might do some quick Lightroom edits, but that, for the most part, is our finished shot. Again, if I turn everything off and go back to the base, you can see how we really kind of cleaned this room up, made it a bit snappier, a bit more alive. All right, so that was our ballroom shot, and what on the surface seemed like a very simple shot actually took a ton of prep and work on location and a fair amount of work in post, but again, mostly simple stuff that you've done before. And hopefully you will begin to see the usefulness of that vanishing point tool. So, all right, so we're all done here. Let's get to the next lesson.